My ex's wife threatens me to return the money her in-laws used to pay for my college. My ex-husband's wife is threatening me to return the money her in-laws spent on my education when we were married. But now she claims I'm ruining her marriage because I talked to my ex. Here's the backstory, as it's important to understand this woman's insanity. I was married to my ex-husband Paul for 6 years, from age 20 to 26. We met at community college. We got married way too young and thought love was enough to conquer the world. Paul came from an upper-middle-class family. His dad owned a small business and his mom worked in real estate. They weren't millionaires, but they were better off than my family. I grew up the opposite way. My mom was a single mother working 3 jobs, and my dad was never around. I'd been working since I was 14, saving whatever I could for college and household expenses. But even with financial aid, community college was a struggle. When Paul and I got serious, his parents liked me. They seemed to respect that I worked hard and wasn't after their money. After we got married, Paul pushed me to transfer to a 4-year university. I was studying business, but I was terrified of student loans. I'd seen how debt can destroy people. I didn't want to start our married life buried in it. Paul insisted it was an investment. The turning point came when his parents invited us to dinner and offered to pay for my bachelor's degree. They explained that they'd saved for Paul's education, but since he'd joined his dad's business, they wanted to use it for me. They emphasized it was a gift, not a loan. Paul was thrilled and said he felt proud that his parents believed in me. I was overwhelmed. No one had ever invested in me like that. They ended up paying for tuition, books, gas, and even bought me a reliable used car to commute an hour to the state university. For 3 years, I busted my ass, taking full course loads and summer classes. Paul's parents were nothing but supportive. Paul was too, but Paul and I started drifting apart. When you get married young, these things happen. Arguments became constant. Eventually, we understood that we wanted different futures. The divorce was mutual. No kids, few assets, just the acknowledgement that we'd taken different paths. His parents were sad but never blamed me. At the courthouse, his mom hugged me and said I was still family even though I wasn't with her son anymore. Afterward, I moved to another city. Got a job. Moved on with my life. Paul stayed home working with his dad. We barely kept in touch because of the distance, but there was no bad blood. I even offered to pay his parents back when I started working, because I felt bad that they'd paid for all that, and now I wasn't even in a relationship with their son. But both Paul and his parents told me no, that they were fine with it. Fast forward 4 years, I'm now 30 and doing well. I've been promoted twice. I live in a nice apartment and I'm in a serious relationship. Paul remarried 2 years after our divorce to a woman named Robin. They seemed happy, bought a house, adopted a dog. Then, last Tuesday, I got a call from an unknown number. A woman immediately started screaming at me, calling me nasty names and demanding I return every cent I'd stolen from her family. It was Robin. She said she'd just found out about the money her parents, though really they're her in-laws, spent on my degree, and that I'd taken advantage of their generosity knowing the marriage wouldn't last. I explained it was a gift, not a loan, and that she could talk to her husband, but she called me a liar and a gold digger. She said she and Paul wanted a bigger house and that I owed over $70,000 counting interest within 30 days, or she'd sue me for theft and fraud. I have to say, I received a generous amount from his parents, but not that much. I even wondered if it was some kind of scam, but she knew things that made it clear it wasn't. My response was that if Paul and his family wanted the money back, I'd talk to them and we'd work something out. But she kept screaming that she'd only negotiate with her, and that I had no right to speak with her husband. The next day, I texted Paul to see if we could talk about Robin's threats. We hadn't talked in a while, but I still had his number. He called back quickly and was more confused than I was about the previous day's call. He said he had no idea she'd contacted me and that he needed to talk to her. 3 hours later, he called again. He said Robin had been bugging him for months about the college money after finding out about it. She believed it was basically her inheritance because at some point his parents would leave that to their son and therefore to her, and that I'd stolen the financial security of their future children. He assured me his parents had always considered it a gift and that no repayment was expected. He apologized for Robin's behavior and said he'd handle it. But the next day, Robin called again, more furious than before. She accused me of ruining her marriage by telling Paul about her call. She said he'd talked to his parents, who confirmed it was a gift, and now she looked like the villain. She accused me of manipulating Paul and his family, insisting that by contacting him I'd proven I was obsessed and trying to break them up. I reminded her I'd only contacted Paul because she'd threatened legal action, but she refused to listen. She ended the call saying she'd contact a lawyer, not just about the money, but also for harassment and interference in her marriage. She claimed she had proof I was manipulating the situation, though I had no idea what she was talking about. At that point, I started wondering if she was having some kind of mental health crisis or something. None of her accusations made sense. All I'd done was protect myself from legal threats. I started researching. Everything I read suggested she had no legal basis. The money was clearly a gift from years ago, with no written agreement and under a marriage that no longer exists. Even if she tried to sue, she'd have no case. But you know how people can drag you through court even when they don't have a case, just to make your life miserable. I was also worried about what this was doing to Paul and his parents. From what he told me, they got upset when she called them. Not at me, but at Robin. I hated that my past was suddenly causing stress in their family. Now I'm stuck in the middle of this over money I accepted so long ago, which I'm grateful for because it helped me enormously. But at the same time, I think I should have paid it back somehow because that would have prevented me from being stuck in the middle of this. I feel like I should do it, obviously to my ex-in-laws and not to Robin, to at least get out of this mess. Update 1. Here's what's happened since I posted. I decided to take some of your advice and contacted a lawyer just to be sure of my legal options. One thing is what you find on the internet, another is what a professional tells you. I just wanted to be sure. After explaining the whole situation, she basically confirmed what we already knew, that Robin has no legal basis because the money isn't hers, and she didn't even have any relationship with anyone when it all happened. The lawyer said the only possibility Robin has is to prove that her in-laws were planning to leave her part of their inheritance, which was extremely unlikely because if they left anyone their inheritance, it would most likely be their son, and that wouldn't be considered marital property. Basically, she told me not to worry about the legal threats and that if I received any formal documents to contact her immediately, but she doubted it would go that far because no serious lawyer would pursue something like this. It was just a threat, and saying lawyers would be involved made it seem serious. But Friday afternoon, I got a call from Paul's mom, Iris. She said she'd been thinking about me since Paul called her about Robin's demands and wanted to reach out to make sure I was okay. We ended up talking for almost an hour and it was really nice to catch up. She asked about my work and my life, and I could tell she was genuinely happy I was doing well. But then she told me things that put this whole situation in perspective. Apparently, Robin has been causing problems about me since the beginning of their relationship. Iris said Robin always felt uncomfortable with the fact that Paul had been married before, and since she found out about this loan, she'd made several comments about how Paul's family was too generous with me during the divorce. I guess she means that I didn't return the money. Because as far as marital assets go, we split everything accordingly and had no arguments about it. Iris also told me Robin had been pressuring Paul to ask his parents for money for the down payment on a house she wants, and they didn't even have to refuse because Paul told her he wasn't going to ask his parents for that. Apparently, Robin had specifically mentioned the money they spent on my education during those conversations, saying it wasn't fair that they'd helped me but wouldn't help Paul's current family. Iris said she was very disappointed with Robin's behavior, and that she and her husband had been having serious doubts about her for months. She said Robin had become increasingly controlling and manipulative, and this whole thing with me was just the latest example of her trying to stir up drama and get attention. The most concerning thing Iris told me was that Paul had confided to his parents that Robin had been going through his phone and social media accounts, looking for proof that he was still in contact with me. Apparently, she saw the birthday messages we occasionally exchanged and convinced herself there was still something going on between us, even though Paul had repeatedly told her we were just being polite and there was nothing romantic about that occasional contact. Clearly a message that says happy birthday with some emojis is code for let's sleep together. Iris said Paul was really struggling with his marriage and had even asked them if they thought he'd made a mistake marrying Robin. She said it broke her heart to see him so stressed and unhappy, especially because he'd seemed so excited about his new relationship when they started. The conversation ended with me saying I really wished I could return that money. I understand it was a gift and they're offended that I want to return it, but I don't feel comfortable with this dynamic. We agreed we'd discuss it, but only when I visited because they wanted to see me in person sometime to catch up. We agreed I'd try to travel some weekend and spend time with them. At this point, it's not an if we'll do it, but it never happens. I really want to settle this matter. Then yesterday, I got a text from Paul asking if we could talk again. When I called him back, he sounded worse than last time. He said things at home had been really bad since Robin found out he'd called his parents about the college money. According to Paul, Robin was furious because his parents had taken my side, and now she was convinced his whole family was against her. Paul told me Robin had given him an ultimatum: either he supported her in getting the money back from me or she was going to assume he was still in love with me and that their marriage was over. He said she'd been crying and screaming for days, saying I was trying to destroy their relationship and that his family would always choose me over her. The craziest part is that Paul said Robin had started packing her things and threatening to move back in with her parents if he didn't agree to help her take legal action against me. Apparently, Robin had contacted a lawyer on her own, but when the lawyer heard the details, she told her she had no case and refused to take her on as a client. I felt really bad for Paul because, like his parents, I thought what Robin was doing was pure manipulation, but at the same time I knew how it would look if the ex told him that. It would only make it seem like Robin was right and that I wanted him back. He apologized again for his wife's behavior and said he was starting to realize his marriage problems went far beyond the college money issue. We ended the conversation with Paul saying he needed to make serious decisions about his relationship and his future. He thanked me for being understanding and said that whatever happened with Robin, he was grateful for the time we were married and for everything his parents did to help me get ahead. Edit. I know Paul's parents could have helped buy the house since they did something for me, but I'm not in my ex-in-law's heads, so I can only assume they haven't wanted to for some reason. Maybe it's because they've noticed weird things about Robin, which wouldn't be surprising. Or maybe Paul and Robin already have a good enough house and they don't think it's worth spending more. I haven't talked to Paul or his parents about the details. Like I said, I don't want to be the ex who's in the middle of all this. I've only been there because Robin dragged me into it, but I plan to keep my distance and talk to them only as much as necessary. Update 2. You won't believe what happened yesterday. It had been a few quiet days since my last update. I hadn't heard from Paul, Robin, or anyone else. I was starting to think the drama had stayed contained between them and I was no longer the focus until I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. But it wasn't Robin's because I remember hers. When I answered, it was a woman who introduced herself as Brett and said she was Robin's sister. This is crazy because sometimes I read stories here about entitled family members, bad siblings, mothers or fathers, and I always hope people give them what they deserve. I never imagined Robin's sister would be looking to do that, but that's exactly what was happening. She apologized for calling me out of the blue and said she'd gotten my number from Robin's phone. Don't ask me how she did it. I didn't ask her either. I immediately had my doubts about this because everything had been so crazy that I wasn't sure if it was some kind of trap. I had no idea what their relationship was like. Brett turned out to be a few years older than Robin. She started by apologizing for Robin's behavior, telling me her version of how Robin had never been a good sister to her. Apparently, Robin has serious financial problems she's been hiding from Paul. Brett said Robin got into some kind of multi-level marketing scheme about a year ago and convinced herself she was going to make a lot of money selling their products. Instead of making money, Robin apparently maxed out several credit cards and took out personal loans to buy inventory and pay for training courses and conferences. Brett said the family tried to warn her she was being scammed, but she wouldn't listen and kept insisting she was building an empire. The financial situation got so bad that apparently Robin was behind on her car payments and had been borrowing money from friends and family without telling Paul. The most shocking thing Brett told me was that Robin spent hours online trying to find information about me. Apparently, she convinced herself I was still manipulating Paul and his family, and had been obsessively checking my social media and even looking for my workplace and address. Brett knew this because Robin talked about me too much to the point of obsession, which is also why she'd called me because she was worried about me. She'd had some bad experiences in the past and wanted to warn me about her sister. According to Brett, Robin's plan was to ask her in-laws for money with the excuse of a new house, but then convince Paul to save that money for their future, gradually withdrawing from the account so he wouldn't notice. Whether that plan would work was another thing, but nothing Robin had been doing for the last few months made much sense to anyone, not even her own family. I asked the sister if she'd told Paul or my in-laws anything, but she said that was her next call. Only she was worried about Robin's obsession with me and thought I should be the first to know. This morning I talked to Paul. He called me. He wanted to tell me what he discovered, which I told him I already knew. After a confrontation the night before, she completely broke down, admitting the whole thing. Paul said that during the fight, Robin also admitted she was obsessed with me, something Brett had already warned him about. He told me he'd decided to separate from Robin and that he'd be staying with his parents for a while. He said he understood that her behavior toward me was just a symptom of much bigger problems, and that he couldn't trust someone who'd lied to him about such important things. Paul apologized profusely for everything his wife put me through and said he'd make sure she didn't contact me again. I told Paul I was sorry his marriage was falling apart, but I was glad he finally saw the truth about Robin's behavior. The whole situation is as sad as it is surreal. Even though we divorced and he was once my husband, I was genuinely happy he'd remarried. That's why I feel bad for Paul, because he clearly married someone who was hiding serious problems. Paul said he talked to a lawyer about starting the divorce. I hope this is the end of the drama, at least for me, and I really hope it is for his family and him too. Also that he can find a really good woman. As they say, third time's the charm. Update 3. Honestly, I can't believe I'm writing another update to this absurd story, but Robin is a completely absurd woman. It's been about a week since my last update. Paul had moved out and was staying with his parents. I hadn't heard from Robin since before talking to her sister Brett. I was starting to think all the drama had calmed down. Then yesterday morning, my boss called and asked me to come in early because of a situation. When I arrived, she told me that someone claiming to be a lawyer had called the company saying I was involved in a fraud case, warning that they might subpoena my employer to testify. The person accused me of stealing from a client but hung up when my boss asked for documentation. My boss suspected it was a scam or harassment but wanted me to know. I knew immediately it was Robin and that she was now targeting my career. I called the lawyer I'd consulted with before. She explained that impersonating a lawyer is a serious crime and that if we could prove Robin was behind it, there could be criminal charges. She suggested contacting Paul to see if he could provide any information about this. When I called him, Paul sounded exhausted. He said Robin had been calling him nonstop for days, begging him to come back one moment and threatening to ruin his life the next. She'd also been harassing his parents to the point where they blocked her number. He finally agreed to get something about what she'd done with my work. And although he wasn't happy with the idea of getting too involved with her, he also told me he owed it to me because I was in the middle of all this and it wasn't my fault. I thanked him, and the next day he called to tell me she'd basically confessed and he had it recorded. Then we reviewed it with my lawyer, and although it wasn't a confession as such, it could be somewhat useful. Then I had another call. A woman introduced herself as a detective from the local police. She said Robin had filed a report accusing me of stalking and harassing her, of calling her work, following her around town, and threatening her family. The detective explained she'd already spoken with Robin but found inconsistencies and wanted my version before moving forward. I went to the police station and spent hours explaining the situation from the beginning. I showed everything I had, including the new information about her call to my work. I gave contact information for Paul, his parents, Brett, my lawyer, and my boss. The only thing I didn't give them was my cat's contact info, which I don't have because I don't have a cat. If the detective already had doubts about Robin's story, with everything I provided, there were no longer any doubts. She pointed out that Robin seemed disconnected from reality during her call, rambling and making accusations that made no sense. When I got home that night and checked my phone, I had 3 voicemails from unknown numbers. One was from a supposed debt collector, another from someone pretending to be from the IRS about my taxes. The last one was just heavy breathing before hanging up. I realized it was probably some friend of Robin's using fake numbers to harass me. The next morning, the detective called me with updates. She'd spoken with Paul and his parents, and their accounts directly contradicted Robin's claims. She also discovered that the call to my work came from a number registered in Robin's name, proving she'd impersonated a lawyer. Based on her findings, she recommended the prosecutor's office file charges for false reporting, harassment, and possibly impersonating a legal professional. She also found evidence that Robin had lied to many people to get loans. Most shocking of all, the detective told me this wasn't the first time Robin had done something like this. She had a record, something her sister had already mentioned, but without going into detail. The details were worse. It was about her strange obsession with people close to an old ex of hers. Paul was fully cooperating with the investigation. He turned over documentation of Robin's debts and lies and agreed to testify if the case went to trial. The detective said the charges would probably lead to a restraining order, prohibiting Robin from contacting me or anyone close to me, and that violating it could bring more charges. The truth is, I couldn't imagine crazier weeks even if I tried. One moment you have a boring life where your biggest concern is what series to watch at night, and the next you're worried because a crazy woman has become obsessed with you and there are lawyers, detectives, and family members who hate that crazy woman involved. Sometimes you wish your life was more exciting, but at the level of finding $100 on the street, not this level. The next time I have a boring Sunday afternoon and complain, I'm going to remember this. This morning Paul texted me to apologize again and let me know he'd filed for divorce. His parents are very happy with the decision and felt relieved. He was finally free from a toxic situation. He also told me something chilling. In other news, I plan to visit my ex-in-laws to settle the matter of my education money. I have savings and I think I can return all the money they gave me. It all depends on how much they consider that debt to be and its interest. The trip is planned to see my ex-in-laws, not Paul. I'm clarifying this before anyone says I'm trying to get back with him or whatever. I'm in a relationship, and both Paul and I are fine with the fact that we ended on good terms. Update 4. I told you I'd be traveling, and you've been asking for an update about that, so here's the gist of what happened. We went to lunch a couple of times, and once Paul joined us for lunch. My boyfriend also traveled with me, so they met and everything was quite pleasant. The only unpleasant thing was the conversations about returning the money. From the very beginning, I made it clear that I wasn't comfortable with the money, especially because of what had happened. But they didn't want to accept the money back because it was a gift and it was an offense to them that I wanted to return it. But I thought it was the right thing to do, and that the gift had been trusting me enough to give it to me in the first place, and I wanted to thank them with a gift by returning it. We finally arrived at a figure that honestly I think is less than what they spent on me, especially if we consider inflation, interest, and those things. But we were traveling for just a few days and I couldn't be negotiating for weeks. The only reason they accepted my money is because they want me to stay in touch with them and not become a stranger. I admit that when I moved away, we'd lost touch. Partly because we'd moved far apart geographically, and partly because it seemed weird being their son's ex. But this trip with my partner proved to be anything but weird, so I don't mind staying in touch with them. Fortunately, this trip had no more drama than that and maybe who paid the lunch bills. I didn't have to see Robin or deal with her in any way. I kept everything secret and didn't post anything on my social media, just in case she could see it. I don't know how many accounts following me might be hers. She also hasn't tried anything new since charges have now been filed against her. Yes, I spoke with her sister again, who assured me her parents were working with her. But that's all I can say. Paul also mentioned at lunch that the divorce papers are filed and he hopes to finish with this soon. It all depends on how difficult Robin wants to make things for him. From what I've seen, I feel sorry for him because I don't see how this can be a simple divorce. But at least my ex is strong enough to fight. The house they have was bought partly with money from my ex-in-laws, which is why they didn't want to give her more money to buy a new one. So in the divorce, Paul will probably keep it since a large part of the property belongs to him and he can prove it. I'll probably have 1 or 2 more updates ahead, depending on what may or may not happen, but at least I plan to come back when I know about Robin's legal problems. My lawyer is also working on a small lawsuit against her, that at this point we don't expect to be very favorable for me since with all her debts it's hard for us to get anything, but at least it serves as a warning. We also have a temporary restraining order against her, which could become permanent if she does anything, but it seems unlikely. Update 5. I wanted to make a final update and end all this. I'm exhausted but happy with the outcome. I haven't been talking much with Paul lately, but I have been with his parents. I'm fulfilling my part of the deal, which is to call them at least once a week, and those calls are always an hour or more. We have a lot to talk about with my ex-mother-in-law, but sometimes my ex-father-in-law picks up the phone, and he spends a long time talking about his favorite hockey and baseball teams. I don't understand any of it, but he's happy to tell me about last night's game. I was never much of a sports fan, and I think he must realize that, but I must be very good at listening. My boyfriend sometimes talks to him because he does understand these things. Paul has finished his divorce, and as I told you, he got the house after paying the part of the mortgage Robin had contributed to. Yes, it was a long and ugly divorce. Robin didn't want to let go of anything. It's safe to say my ex-in-laws won't maintain a relationship with her after this. As for the legal problems, some charges and fines have been filed for what she did, but she won't be spending time in prison if that's what you were hoping. I really didn't imagine that, so my expectations were met. I really don't know what's become of her because after the temporary restraining order I haven't had any more contact, and my ex-in-laws and Paul don't know much either. I haven't spoken to her sister again either. Regarding the lawsuit, we didn't expect much. They ruled in our favor for $5,000. But since she's declared bankruptcy due to all her debts, we'll probably take a long time to see that money. The important thing, at least for me, is knowing she won't bother me again. And my petty side has some satisfaction that her credit score will be ruined for a long time. That's something I alone take satisfaction in because I keep mine in the best shape.